So friends, in this section, in this afternoon section, we have four guests, four panelists who very kindly agreed to join us. And I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. I'm going to introduce the panelists first, and then we'll move through, and we'll go through in this order. We're going to start with Daniel Perell. Daniel's the representative, he represents the Baha'i International Community to the UN. And he has done so for many years, one of their main representatives. He's coordinator of the UN 75 People's Declaration. This is a very significant declaration which has been endorsed by over 700 civil society organizations. And Dan's especially active in fostering civil society partnerships at the UN on sustainable development and environmental issues. So in terms of cooperation, Dan's very much involved in the cooperation of civil society around the agenda of the UN. Jimena Leiva Roesch is a senior fellow and head of peace and sustainable development at the International Peace Institute. She's a former member of the Permanent Mission of Guatemala to the UN. She was the lead negotiator for Guatemala on the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN climate change negotiations. So she has immediate professional experience in international cooperation. She's also the joint author of two books, Negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals, which is an insider's view of the story behind the historic UN process of negotiating the SDGs, and also Negotiating at the United Nations, a practitioner's guide. And in a sense, when we look at the art of cooperation, even for us in our own lives, very much of it is about negotiating on behalf of evolution. So I think there will be a lot of interesting thoughts to mine from Jimena. Emad Kiyaei you're very welcome, Emad. Emad's director of the Middle East Treaty Organization, a coalition of civil society activists and practitioners seeking to rid the Middle East from all weapons of mass destruction. Emad is joining us from Paris. He is also a principal at the international consulting firm, the IGD Group, where he provides strategic advice at the intersection of political risk, diplomacy, and disarmament to political, business, and civil society leaders. Emad is the co-author of A Middle East Free of Weapons of Mass Destruction, A New Approach to Non-Proliferation. He was earlier associated with Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and Columbia University's Center for International Conflict Resolution. And he's the former executive director of the American-Iranian Council, an educational organization focusing on US-Iran relations. And finally, it's my pleasure to welcome Marco Toscano-Revolta. Marco's been an international civil servant for over 20 years, serving with the UN and other international organizations. He's worked in the field in the field and at UN headquarters in areas of refugees and human rights protection, justice administration, rule of law, humanitarian relief, sustainable development, and disaster risk management. So all four of you are very welcome. I think it's quite a privilege to have all four of you together. Two of you, Jimena and Marco, have spoken at World Goodwill events before, and you're extremely welcome to see you back again. And two of you are new faces, and I'm very much looking forward to those of us who are all on this call from around the world to seeing your face, hearing your voice, and getting to know you a little as we reflect on this subject. So, Dan, can you set us off with some thoughts on this theme of crisis and the transformation happening in the path to global cooperation?
Sure, it's a very small topic, so I'm glad that you gave me the full 3 hours to address it. So everybody sit back, get a snack. No, it's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. The invitation came sort of out of the blue, but as I've learned more and heard more about this community, I feel a very strong resonance. And it's really a pleasure to have learned more about what it is that you're working on and hopefully what I can add may be of use, but it seems actually from even what I heard as I joined, what I'm saying may be redundant to what you all already know. So I apologize if that's the case. But as was mentioned in the introduction, I do represent the Baha'i International Community at the United Nations. I've been doing this for about 10 years, which isn't so long by the standards of cultural change and the kind of shifts that we need to see in society. But it is long enough to see a few narrative arcs come and go. And I think this is sort of what I'll try to touch on in this little contribution. And I think at this moment in human history, it's really ripe for opportunity. But not because we have the political will we need, not because there's some new technology or innovation that is, that we're on the cusp of finding. But it's because, to me, the needs are becoming so great that at any moment, just one small deviation, one small change in the collective psyche could cause the whole system to be turned on its head. And I think that would be actually quite a good thing, considering where the system has gotten us thus far. But what we can see is that throughout history, these periods of turbulence always present opportunities to redefine our collective values and the assumptions that underlie them. So at each stage in human history, there's a more complex level of integration that takes place, from the community to the nation and now to the world. But at each stage, there is a more pressing challenge that emerges that forces us to grow further. And society then is compelled to devise new arrangements. So at this moment, all of these concurrent demands, these concurrent crises are pushing our existing structures beyond their capacity for effectiveness. We find ourselves for the first time needing to purposefully organize our affairs in the full consciousness of ourselves as one people in one homeland. But to truly acknowledge this global interdependence requires actually a genuine concern for all. And that is something we heard in the meditation before the break. And it's a deceptively simple concept, but it really implies a profound reordering of priorities. So for example, the starting point for a consultation on any program or any policy really has to be consideration of the impact it'll have on all segments of society, not just the constituency it seeks to help. And if we use this as a lens to understand the diverse challenges facing humanity, we see a new kind of consciousness must emerge. So what are the hazards that are facing humanity? And I don't want to get too dark or too into the weeds about these things, and I'm sure we can all list them in the chat box. Climate change, economic shocks, inequality, food shortages, and I'm in the United States, so food surpluses, racial injustice, gender inequality, disasters of all kinds, natural and man-made, a breakdown of trust, some of these more profound issues. And then, of course, there's a pandemic layered over all of this. But what makes these hazards actually into crises is how we are able or unable, rather, to respond to them. So with COVID-19, sort of layered on this, it becomes an accelerant or an exposer of vulnerabilities that have often remained hidden either by our ignorance or by deliberate choice. There are conspiracy theories about all kinds of things, and that could be one of them. But importantly, I would posit that this list of all of these challenges are actually a list of symptoms. And the real malady, the real crisis is far deeper. It's related to a number of things that I saw in the chat, but materialism, to power, and really to ultimately a detachment from that which distinguishes human beings from the rest of the cohabitants on this planet. So it lies within the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, that deeper thing within us. And until we're able to shift our thinking beyond this accumulation as development mentality, our social and institutional systems will remain inadequate to respond effectively. So notions of progress grounded in material gain and profit, or a reluctance to explore an ethical or spiritual dimension of existence, this has become commonplace in the international discourse. And it's actually the result of a logical conditioning. For the majority of human history, this accumulation was how we survived. But if we keep using those old paradigms in new contexts, we're not going to meet the full spectrum of our needs. So in a world where for the first time there's sufficient material goods for all and the capacity to equitably distribute them, perpetuating this accumulation mentality is actually counterproductive. It creates gross inequalities. So having demonstrated that previous notions are no longer suitable, what do we do with this growing interdependence? And we're confronted with a question to which we do not have a clear answer. How are we to behave personally, as communities, and as institutions in an interconnected world that is so different from anything we've experienced before? And this has the potential, the great potential, to expand our consciousness, to help us rethink our priorities, to gain an appreciation for our shared identity, and ultimately to reorder our societies based on that understanding. So principles such as unity, solidarity, concern for collective and individual well-being, a reliance upon good science and accurate information, these have been conceived of as the soft dimensions of our responses. But actually, these are the greatest tools we have because they allow us the potential to rise above even the most broken of systems and set humanity on a course of true resilience, both in times of hardship and prosperity. So just to repeat, because it runs contrary to these narratives that we're often taught, it's unity, solidarity, and concern for collective well-being. These are the hard dimensions of prosperity, not what we have conceived of as the hard dimension. So now that we've identified to a degree this problem, what do we do about it? So in the international advocacy sphere, I really see 4 conversations about change happening, and they're interconnected. And I think a growth is happening from the first level that I'll articulate all the way to the deeper levels. And that growth, that progress has been marked in the past decade, I would say. So at the most superficial level, you have a discussion of the actors, the governments, the corporations, the leaders themselves. You know, if we just change the leadership, then all will be right with the world. And I think this idea is, you know, we're moving past this notion, which I think is to our benefit. The second level is that the systemic level. So it's not the players of the game, it's the game itself. So if the system puts it, you know, the system in place rewards corruption or encourages the pursuit of profit at the expense of well-being, it treats truth as a negotiable commodity. It's not the player themselves, it's actually the game that they're playing, and the game produces this kind of player. And that's right to a degree, and we see this is where most of the conversation is at the international level. So it talks about which commissions, which policies, which mandates can we put in place to change the structures, and this will serve as a balm to the sore. But again, the game itself is based on certain underlying assumptions, and this is the third level. So even the game is rigged, there's a misalignment of these assumptions on which our system is based. So some of these assumptions would include, and I've referenced them earlier, that development is defined in terms of material profit, that missteps in a path of learning are a sign of weakness, that self-interest is the way to progress, and that competition produces better results than cooperation. These are some of the fictions that we've been told. And unless and until these narratives are shifted in the collective psyche, it'll be difficult for any new institution to reflect the realities necessary for the world. So that's the third level. And then the fourth level, we have to admit that at the third level, if we're talking about changing conceptual frameworks, it's both daunting and it also is reminiscent of the imposition of a dominant worldview that has gotten us into a lot of problems. So we have to acknowledge this and then get to the fourth level, which is that of our own humanity, our own nobility, our sacred duty and privilege to serve each other. And this level draws upon certain fundamental truths. And I see in the chat box, it begins with the individual. That's right. Well, I think that's right. So it draws on certain fundamental truths that we all must recognize. For example, trustworthiness, generosity, humility, rectitude of conduct, dignity, our collective destiny. All of these things, once we understand them internally, we can begin to express them externally. And I do believe that this conversation is happening more in the international space. How can we restore trust? How can we strengthen social cohesion? How can we ensure that we are taking into account the consideration of all, of the needs of all? And this is a growing conversation, which is great. And as this level increasingly takes center stage, we'll see that at the first level, individuals in positions of influence will reject these contradictions that they can no longer abide. At the second level, these unjust structures will come to be inconsistent with the values of those who operate within them, leading to pressure for meaningful change. At the third level, these current notions of progress, though they may have served an important role in the past, will give way to deeper understandings of the true story of humanity. Just 2 or 3 more brief points, I promise. I want to offer my own take on how we can increasingly turn to this third and fourth levels to draw upon and reevaluate. And I think it takes a posture of a process orientation rather than an outcome orientation. What I mean by that is that the approach to progress must build gradually on strengths and respond to evolving realities, And this is how crisis can help us so much. We can now admit that the world we seek has not existed, and we're all equally searching for these solutions. Progress toward the goals enshrined in global agendas, for example, this calls for a conscious reorientation toward experimentation, search, innovation, and creativity, as opposed to positioning, adversarialism, and politicking, excuse me. And this all may seem quite naive, but to me, what's more naive is believing that what we've been doing thus far should be perpetuated because it's been working so well. So the final point, just to say that the true disease that we're facing is actually not COVID-19, nor is it the other symptoms of the struggling order, the other crises. The disease is an insistence on an approach that does not speak to the deeper needs of humanity at this moment in history. It's the retention and perpetuation of outworn habits, attitudes, and institutions. And therefore, we have to engage in a collective exploration of the root causes of these problems as vigorously as we seek some of these superficial things like a vaccine. While a vaccine can stave off a pandemic, it's a collective exploration that can help us develop patterns of thought and action that will result in systems of collective flourishing, even in the face of future calamities. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to questions and to my co-panelists as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Well, I think all four of you, that's like the whole thing presented before us. That's beautiful. Jimena.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's always great to be connected with you and with the group. Y muy buenas tardes a todos nuestros colegas latinoamericanos también que nos están escuchando desde América Latina. And I was delighted to be after Daniel, because I think so many things I'll say will kind of flow after what he just mentioned. Basically, I've ordered my thoughts in like a triangle, so on three main points. The first one is this idea of what is the spiritual crisis and the spiritual dynamics of crisis mean for the person or the individual. Then the second point in my triangle is what does it mean for the UN and for the international community? And then the third point is what are its implications for the planet as a whole, right? So on the personal aspects, I think that this 2020 has been a period of deep reflection, chaos, confusion, and hopefully also a period of renaissance and deep spiritual growth. So everyone I've spoken to has gone through some type of, metamorphosis, personal metamorphosis from this year of 2020, which has accelerated a lot of deep personal feelings that were perhaps covered, and now through this period of instability, it's just things have just come up at a personal level that we've all had to deal with. And the incredible thing about what has happened in 2020 is that this crisis, the epicenters have been in the north, which usually it's the south that suffers from this constant, reminders that we're mortal. It's for the first time in a very long time that people in New York and in Europe feel and are reminded that we are quite fragile, we're quite mortal, and that things can change quite rapidly. Because in the Western world, when we've had so much stability, we start taking things for granted. And so this crisis has been different in the fact that it has been touching the centers of power. It has been touching people that have a lot of influence and a lot of resources that can actually change the world. And so, for example, I really believe that this what has happened through COVID has become for many a personal awakening, such like for so many in the 9/11 attacks happened. And I know, for example, I'm working with an entrepreneur right now that is that is connected with the 40 wealthiest families in the United States. And he said that for him, The 9/11 opened up his heart to this change, and now his life is devoted to the 2030 agenda. I would like to think that many more people like him with that type of power and resources are awakening now and are going to shift their models of influence and their personal resources towards good. So at a personal level, there is an opportunity, a choice for growth and for realizing that we're part of that oneness, of that humanity that Daniel and Steve and Kathy and others have touched upon. So that's the first point. The second point is how the UN has taken this. And you know, the Secretary General mentioned that we are in the at our 1945 moment. What does that mean? Like at a moment where after the Second World War, the UN was created and there was this cohesion and coordination and really the ability to see ourselves as one. But I believe that we're still not in 1945. We're like hopefully we're in 1944 and not like in 1943. Hopefully we're towards the end, but we're definitely not in 1945. We're still in the midst of a lot of chaos. The pandemic, at least in the United States, is still raging uncontrollably. And I don't think the dust has settled in any ways. The fires have not like been kind of calmed down. The temperature is still high. So I think that we're still in a moment of complete and utter transformation where it's very confusing for the international community what to do. This is reflected in the fact that the UN is in its most dire financial situation ever. It's questioning its relevance and its importance in the world, where it's seeing other forums rise up and perhaps have more power than theirs. So for the UN as well is a call for transformation. It's also a wake-up call for the UN to be more inclusive and to challenge those assumptions that Daniel was saying and those fictions that in a way formed it. So it is also a period of deep upheaval for the organization. And then for the planet, I think what COVID-19 has brought is the mindset for all of us, particularly living in the West that had comfortable lives, understand that life changes in exponential ways, that one thing can really shift from one moment to the other. And the climate change scenarios, the climate emergency that we're living right now requires that type of mindset, requires that type of understanding that we are not living in a stable moment, that we're in a highly unstable, in a moment that we need to change, not in incremental ways, which is the way the international community has behaved. We need to change in exponential ways in order to have emissions by 2030 and then by 2050. So the challenge is very big. Fortunately, we see more leaders coming up, from Greta to many figures at the city level, at the national, at the regional, at the global level, asking for this change, but it's not enough. So basically at the personal, at the UN level, and at the planetary level, we see that we have a choice. At the planetary and at the humanity level, we have a choice either to revert to kind of a Middle Ages kind of period of bordering ourselves in feuds, being fearful, being isolated, or we have the choice of really building a renaissance where the principles of cooperation, solidarity, and universality will be the guiding values for this new era. So thank you so much.
Wow, Jimena, thank you. So Emad, over to you, bro.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and wow. I mean, I've been taking so many notes throughout this event because there's so many beautiful words and pathways that have been provided. My task is easy. I work on disarmament and negotiations, and I work in a region called the Middle East, which is one of the easier places to work on peace and security, as you can imagine. And a group of us came together and we're like, okay, where can we go to create the changes that we want in our environment. And we looked at different challenges. Daniel was so fantastic in listing all of these things that we're facing. So thank God I don't have to go into that. But we know what the mess looks like. We know where our challenges are. The world is going through this transformation. It's been hit on all fronts, from ecology to the environment, to our politics, to our relations between us, between each other, between nations, communities. And we see all of these tensions and all of this filth, in a way, has come to face us, to give us a choice. What do we do when it's like we're cleaning up our houses and we are realizing, oh my goodness, there's a lot of skeletons in the closet. There's a lot of things wrong. Nobody wanted to talk about uncle over there. They didn't want to talk about auntie over here. We didn't want to talk about these things, but now everything's out. When you have an election in 2020, after 4 years of President Trump, and the elections are this close, you have to ask yourself, what does the other think of the other in relations to all of these challenges? Why have we reached this level of polarization in our mental, in our emotional, in our physical, in what we believe to be true and not true? And so the universality of our values and where we base our compass has completely become mushy, in a sense. So it is a time when we no longer know what is fact from fiction. I mean, this is what millions of people across the world are actually facing in their, echo chambers that reinforces their belief that, a small group of people are controlling the world, to the earth being flat, whatever the case may be. This is actually happening in our time. And so this group of characters that I'm part of said, you know what, let's go to the heart of the region we know. I'm an Iranian, my colleague is an Israeli, the other is a Palestinian, and I promise you, I know it sounds like a joke, we can walk into a bar, the Arab, the Israeli, and the Persian, and we had a Brit in there, of course, and they discussed how do we actually bring about those incremental changes that is required within a process that Daniel was talking about, that has and reaches an outcome. Now, we looked at various other models of where there was enormous amounts of misunderstanding, mistrust, an array of conflicts that are happening at different levels with different actors, with different processes. And we try to identify what will be the common ground, in a sense that we can build a foundation. And here I want to zoom in, because I think it's important for us to realize that I don't represent governments. I'm part of civil society. And when we went and looked at how do we get rid of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, people said, you guys are crazy. They said, we've been working on this. We want to reach a treaty, but nobody wants to write the treaty text. So we said, why not we write it? So we went and we wrote a draft treaty text, and we sent it out to most incredible experts in chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, disarmament experts from the region, outside the region. And we had this group of advisors that we still have that allowed us to begin the process of writing a treaty. I don't know how to write a treaty, I promise you. I don't even know how to write my own name sometimes. But the bottom line was that we reached a point that if we wait for the actors that Daniel identified, if we wait until the game changes, until the rules are not rigged anymore, heaven's sake, we'll be 2100 and still talking about this. Get in there and break it. Change the laws, change the rules. I am a madman when I'm appearing in front of the United Nations and my colleagues are saying, oh boy, the show has started. Let's go check these crazies, the Israeli, the Palestinian, the Iranian, with a Brit in the middle, talking about how to get rid of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. Let's go and see what they have to say. Because actually, when you look at these actors, when you look at these institutions, they don't have fresh ideas on how to move forward. They are so stuck in this mud of trying to send another protocol before I can speak to you. No, this is what is happening at our level of policy making. It is time for people who are just have enough will in them, that have enough insights in them, that have enough wisdom in them, that have enough connection to whatever you call divine or other, that see that this can be different. That, as Daniel said, we have the resources. It's just not equitable. It's just not distributed properly. That we are relying on our leaders to make the change, knowing very well that the leaders are not representative of us or our ideals, of our visions, of our future. So let's be clear about a few things. One, that the process is important, but to imagine a future we want is also important. And that's where Kathy's visualization is so important. But when we bring it down, this group of characters that I work with, we imagined the future first. We saw the Middle East free from these weapons. We saw it as a gateway for them to realize that an Arab, an Israeli, and a Palestinian, and all of these others, plus the Iranians, are so much more similar than we are dissimilar. That when the Middle East is not a coincidence that the Abrahamic religions flourished and began and bloomed in the Middle East. It is not a coincidence that Jerusalem has been a city that has been fought over by all that have crossed its paths. So when the Middle East is in turmoil, it radiates the energy of destruction and instability across the region around it. And what is the region around it? I mean, fine, it's a bit far from, South America, but I promise you, it hits quite well to Africa, to Central Asia, to Europe. We are at the, backyard or front yard of all of these cross sections of where people and ideas and motions have happened and rippled. So that is why we're focusing on the Middle East, because that's what we know. But that does not mean that if your expertise is on Colombian, ecosystem, that it should stop you from radiating from there. The idea is that if we truly want to seek peace, if we want to truly seek love, if we want to radiate that through our work, through our actions, then similarly, we have to go through our own individual processes with an ultimate vision of our own self-future, and then backtrack and say, what do I have to work on today? And you know what? I know this may sound very basic, but when they say that, you want to change your world, start with changing yourself. Everybody's heard this saying. Think about it next time a little bit extra, because it is so hard to change your habits. It is so hard to know that, damn it, you cannot bring death into your system if you preach peace. Then why are you having that hamburger again? Let us be conscious that if we want an end to carnage and cruelty, let us be kind to all sentient beings. And in that, let's be kind to ourselves. And in that, let us take those actions that then whoever is around us, whoever is in our environment, can truly see that what we are resonating is love. Let us feed not our little monsters that have become these paper tigers that seem so enormous to collapse. Let us give power to parts of us that can bring down those monsters into small little pebbles that we can just throw away. And it's not impossible. The tagline for these conferences...
I'm just watching the time.
30 seconds. I want to end with this. We are doing our process, and I want to give you one example before I go. We took a lot of Arabs from every Arab country, Iranians and Israelis, former officials, current officials, we can't say who they are. We put them into an environment that we could control for 4 days for them to discuss. Day one, they would not even recognize each other or acknowledge each other. Day four, I cannot tell you that those who see each other as enemies embraced. Those who thought that the other was another species realized that they are their brothers and sisters. And that I have seen with my eyes. And that I will tell you, that can happen in the Middle East. Oh my goodness, it can happen anywhere. That song, New York, must change to Middle East. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emad. Wow. So Marco.
Thank you, Stephen. I would have loved to just keep listening to Emad, Jimena, and Dan, actually, rather than speaking myself. It's really fascinating. So thank you, Steve, for having me again, I would say. And also, it's really a pleasure to be with all of you and with my fellow panelists. It's not quite easy then to start from where they left it. And of course, some of the points are of great inspiration to me as well. So I'll try to elaborate around those as well. The first things that, has been described, we're all well aware that the magnitude of the crisis is really huge. And we haven't seen it in decades. But one thing that gave me a lot of inspiration is actually the etymology of the word the crisis, which coming from Latin and ancient Greek means choice, decisions. So that pushed me pondering what really are the crux of what I'm supposed to do to start with, and a little bit what is the task at hand. And also to basically figure out that a crisis is not just a moment of pain, of suffering and reaction, but it's most fundamentally a significant moment of assessment, discernment, choices, decisions, and then action. And then I want really to underline, because it goes also to what Daniel and Emad and Jimena was talking about, is figuring out what's the model behind before we act. Otherwise, we perpetuate the vicious circle. We are looking at a very hard question at the moment. We know that, we have heard that. The risk that our paradigms, that were chosen paradigms of economic, social growth have brought to us, they're creating risk, they're not reducing risk for us. The ever-growing inequality is a big thing. And most fundamentally also, what is the status of international cooperation? Whether we have existing sufficient and genuine solidarity across peoples, whether we have a proper political will, and I'll go back to this proper political will, and also the determination to transcend our usual borders and interests. The global spread is clearly given and due to our interconnectedness, as also said earlier. But this globalization is not really a new thing, if we think about it. It exists since the dawn of civilizations. I would dare to say that the globalization, in fact, is the result of an inherent tendency of our conscience toward expansion and unification. And that, for me, is a very an important resource to keep in mind. And I think that from crisis to crisis, what is really happening is that we're steadily coming to terms with the fact and practical consequences of being one humanity. We're learning the hard way, sometimes the nice way, but most of the time the hard way. But there is hope there. Why? Because in a way, what is happening is that what happens in any country now is clearly of global relevance. And this is pushing us to reassess certain key tenets of our international order, and also national orders fundamentally. We are supposed to basically to reconsider the very same notion of national interest. We have to reconsider what domestic jurisdiction means. We have to reconsider what national sovereignty really means, and most fundamentally the common good. Interconnectedness, sometimes we feel it is a bit intrusive, but at the same time it has brought to us incredible advances. However, not for all. And that is another big thing. So crises, luckily, what they really do is that they reveal the unjust measures that exist within our chosen paradigms. And I underline the word chosen paradigm. So clearly, as also my other friends said before me, the COVID-19 crisis it was not created by a virus. It was maybe triggered by a virus, but in a way is the result of a dangerous mix of health, economic, social, environmental, political questions and choices. And clearly also a very questionable, exploitative, if not abusive relations that we have with the other realms of nature. So the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdoms, the mineral kingdoms. So it's very clear to us what the course correction needs to be. It's becoming very, very, very evident somehow. And the measures that we need to take in the interest of those left behind and the poor, and also most fundamentally for the planet and all its realms there. So I think that fundamentally what is really happening is that we are coming, let's say that I have the impression that we are called upon to focus on what being humans actually means and implies. Planetary evolution is the result of the evolution of each kingdom, but also on the collaboration across kingdoms. We human beings are the results of these three kingdoms there. So what is expected, or what is the expected evolution of human beings? What is the added value that we are expected to bring to the other realms of nature? And what can we make of our lives in order to contribute to evolution at large, and also to these cooperative relations? And I think that all this is fundamentally a very important backdrop to international cooperation and international relations. Of course, an important question is how we collectively understand and then we pursue the common good. And that question is really upon us now. But we're not starting from scratch. We know that there are certain parameters already there. The SDGs is one, and the founding of the United Nations is another one. And it's very important to keep in mind that the common good is not and cannot be a static thing, because rather it evolves with our conscience. Now, the past 24 October, as also Dan said, is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And certainly this is a milestone in international relations, but for me is a fundamental milestone in the growth of human consciousness. We got there. It took millennia, in fact. And that conscience is very important and is enshrined in Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, together with two very important words, in spirit of brotherhood, which probably nowadays we should call it in spirit of siblinghood. But let me quote Article 1, because I think it's a poem in and of itself. It says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in spirit of brotherhood. Now, this article is powerful beyond law. It is law, but it's powerful beyond law. It's a compass, really. But for me to get fully its power, it needs to be linked to another important article of the Declaration, which is Article 28, that says everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. Very often overlooked article. For me, is probably one of the most important of the declaration. What this article tells us is that international relations, international cooperation, global orders are not a space for deals or power games, but fundamentally and necessarily are means, and basically the space where we can thrive and live. And now this takes me back to the United Nations, because the UN in itself also is a means. Is a means to generate this collective approach and order. And I think that the essence of the United Nations is extremely well captured in Article 1, which is the one on the purposes and principles of the organizations, but most fundamentally in paragraph 4, which says, I quote, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. Now, this article is really the essence of it. It's the only article of the Charter that is not about doing, it's about being. It says to be. The other 3 paragraphs, in fact, are about peace and security, cooperation, friendly relations among nations, but they can only be achieved until and unless we are able to give energy and really establish this center for harmonizing. It's not a center for harmony, it's a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. And an important point at this stage is religion, philosophy, and psychology has actually helped us understand that already there is a center within ourselves of that nature. So we don't start really from scratch, but it's important to search for that center, identify it, nurture it, and actually give it the lead. And this center is strongly related to will. And therefore, how well we use our will, how well we know how it works, its relations to the heart, and ultimately our capacity and freedom to use such will of the heart is really fundamental. Now, this, I'm coming toward the end, this Center for Harmonizing the Actions of Nations in the Attainment of the Common Ends fundamentally rely on our capacity to discover and nurture that center within us, within ourselves. I would dare to say that global cooperation starts from within, but in fact is also what Emad, Dan, and Jimena has said already. And I like to stress on that point. This brings me back to this question of the proper political will that I referred to at the beginning. My sense is that political will simply is not enough. Why? Because a discriminatory law or an act of war are expression of political will. And therefore, I think that we need to work really harder to integrate our will with something else, with other indispensable qualities. It's to be good, heartful, benevolent, wise, and transcendent interest. Of course, it must start, as we said, from all of us, because if I don't do it, why others should do it, why nations should do it. So projecting the solution of the world on international cooperation is a mirage somehow. Because if everybody is expecting somebody else, as also Emad was saying, forget it. We're going to be here in the next millennia. Emad has been generous in saying the next century. From this perspective, and this is my last point, from this perspective, we can really appreciate what an incredible and huge experiment was initiated 75 years ago. I believe that nothing of this scope and import has ever happened in recorded history. And therefore, I really dare to say that the United Nations is 75 years young. We are in very, very early days of an experiment of forging and using collective will for the common good. And we must give the experiment our conscious and focused attention, our determinations over generations. It's a long run, it's a relay run. Yet the timing and each leg of it is of essence. And I think that the next few months, and I would say the 10 years, are really of critical importance as we build the building blocks of what we are set to achieve in the next 50 to 60 years. It is a time where the space of our hearts, the lights of our minds, the energy of our bodies may be consciously and intentionally, purposely used in service of humanity, the planet and its realms, in spirit of siblinghood. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Wow. I think now, according to the schedule, we're supposed to have 5 minutes break, but I'm going to make a bit of a unilateral and ask the other panelists, you can have a voice on this. I think we should just move on because there's such fire and such magnificent energy coming from a body of professionals who represent through their individuality, these voices of the International Civil Service, of those individuals representing governments, and of those individuals actively involved in negotiation representing civil society. So my suggestion is we don't stop. We need to move with this. And let's have just sort of, I want to bring in the chat box, but just for a few minutes together, and maybe just carrying on, Marco, from that thought that sure, we're at, as Jimena said, we're not at 1945. However, the significance of what happened at 1945 was something that came from, if you like, from governments. Now it's as if that is becoming human. And that's so this thing of the personal intersecting with the government and this deep stirring of consciousness of all peoples. And I love that thought. For the first time, really, it's come to the countries of the North and the West. So now we have North, West, East, and South stirring in crisis.
Can I offer a few thoughts? Is that okay? I don't know exactly the process.
No, but no, there's no, yeah, please. We're having a chat.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Because I went first, I didn't have the opportunity to respond to what I heard from people before me. So if you'll allow me, I thought that the subsequent speakers were amazing, and I'm glad I went first so I didn't have to speak in their shadow. But just a couple of things came to my mind as I was listening. First, with Jimena mentioning this North-South divide, you know, one of the things that I try to work on is this notion of global citizenship. And often I'm asked, you know, what good does global citizenship do for, you know, the Malawian who doesn't have food on their table? What does this new mentality matter? And initially I was trying to defend it. Oh, it can help them to see themselves in this broader us and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then I realized, no, you're right. But if we can change the habits of those in the global North, if they can start to adjust the systems that we have been, I'm one of them, we have been perpetuating, then actually that will be of great benefit to the Malawian, you know, just to choose some random country, no disrespect to Malawi. But really, many of these issues that we're talking about are actually, the place of change, the locus of change has to be in the global North. Those societies that have built the culture that we're in. And yet the UN is so focused on how to help the global South. It's totally misplaced. I think that all the country offices should be in Washington, D.C., in London, in Rome, not in, you know, Mogadishu and you know, all of these other places. That, yeah, it's helpful, but it's not actually where the true change needs to be. Emad was phenomenal, of course. And it made me think, you know, why I do the work that I do. It's not because I think the UN is again, the locus of change. Far from it. I mean, nearly all Baha'is, myself included, we're engaged very much at the grassroots levels and community building efforts. That's where true change happens. But if you don't have people, hopefully like Baha'is and like yourselves and others, whispering in the ears of you know, the powerful, how are they going to know the way? And so, you know, the work is like water over a rock. It's going to take decades or centuries to make a change at the rate we've been going, but it can actually take place, provided we don't put all of our eggs in this basket. And one other thought came to mind as he was speaking is, I don't know if you've seen the Lego movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I know it's animation, but I'm a child at heart. The whole idea of the movie is this one character is looking for the special. The person who's best with Legos, who can make any shape he wants out of the Legos. And if only we find the special, then we can solve the problem. And of course, to give away the ending for those who haven't seen it, it turns out that we're all the special. And we all actually can do this. And I think this is very representative of where we are in the world today, that if we keep on turning to others to make the change for us, we're going to be waiting for a very long time. And we have to all treat ourselves like the special. And then the last thing is just responding to Marco, who I always love listening to. His, idea of this evolutionary process, I think dovetails really nicely with this question from Martin in the Q&A about which one issue on the international agenda would we like to be solved in the next 5 years. To me, it almost doesn't matter which of the issues. I mean, if I could choose one, it'd be whichever one is the greatest crisis. But what matters much more than the thing is actually the process that it can instill in us. If it's the smallest thing that the UN finally cooperates on and can learn a lesson from that, then that's the thing I want. I actually think the UN has a couple of magical issues, but we don't talk about them because those things are working. So nobody, that's not a squeaky wheel. It doesn't get any grease. But when you fly across borders, when you make an international phone call, that's all because of the UN. They have systems in place to allow international travel, international telecommunications. We have agreed on international cooperation. Let's just take that same lesson and apply it to the next thing, and then the next thing. If we're trying to start with the Security Council, for example, we are in big trouble. I think that all the Security Council talk, it's the sexiest thing, it's the most politically attractive thing, it is also the most difficult, the least likely, and the one that will cause, I think, the UN to cave in on itself. If we start with these smaller ones that can then build up a culture of cooperation and collaboration, then we can get to the Security Council when humanity is ready for it. Anyway, those are just a few thoughts. Thanks again. I really love listening to you all and look forward to more.
Emad, Jimena, Marco.
I think Jimena wanted to go first. Please, Jimena.
No, please go ahead. I'll go after. Yeah.
I had just some random thought, but I was the last to speak, so maybe it's space to you first, and then I'll come back. Please, Jimena, Emad.
Sure. So I was reflecting on this issue of the North and the South. One of the things that we tried to do with the 2030 agenda, and we had a lot of pushback at first, was that it needed to be universal. The Millennium Development Goals were not universal. They were targets specifically for the South. But in the 2030 agenda, with the Sustainable Development, all governments, all of us made, and peoples, because it's a people and government framework, decided that it needed to be universal. And at the heart of this universal agenda is Goal 12, changing unsustainable patterns of consumption and production, which of course received some of the greatest pushback by our beloved United States because it was so hard. But but in that goal, I remember the Indian colleague telling, we have lessons that the US can learn from us in changing patterns of consumption and production. So we already have frameworks that are guiding us into this universal vision in which we have to change this fiction that the North has the answers and the South needs to apply them. So that's one, and the Paris Agreement is the other universal agreement in which a lot of the burden and a lot of the things that need to happen is also in this hemisphere and in larger emerging economies. So while I was in COVID, I was actually wanting to, having to take a personal decision to just stay in New York or do I go back home? But if you think about it, one of the things that made me stay here is because I believe really the work in so many ways is about opening the hearts and minds of people that have the financial and the biggest sphere of influence. So thank you.
Right.
Wait, Mark, am I waiting for you or do I go?
No, I'm waiting for you. Everybody's waiting to hear what Emad's got to say.
No. Okay. Wow. First of all, I wish I could see all the 266 people on this webinar because I missed that. Can I just say that? And everybody has spoken such beautiful words and it's so much inspiration. And in that process, we have realized that we're not alone. So first of all, just realize that you're not alone, that there's a lot of people slowly chipping at making sure that we can create that change. and those little incremental ones. Daniel's favorite cartoon was, you know, the Lego. Mine is Ant, because I love ants. Ant is just this little guy, and he goes and he, you know, finds his way into, like, you know, finding ways of responsibility and then making change. He's the average Joe. The whole idea of, like, we can actually do some of these things with incremental changes. But if we do it all collectively, that incremental change will have exponential change on a grander screen. So I'm just saying, don't give up hope. Don't think that what you're doing doesn't matter. And that's why our actions and our thoughts and our intentions, as many people have put in the message box, are important to be aligned. That we have to tap into the infinite amount of wisdom that is out there in our universe, in our thinking. But to tap into that, we have to make sure that periodically we acknowledge it, that we ensure that we are actually in there, and we can bring that infinite knowledge and wisdom, channel it through ourselves, and pick out whatever we can to then turn into actions. I say all of this because I know that the UN seems a difficult place for any progress. But since I talked about this draft treaty, I want to just bring an end to it. The idea of a WMD free zone in the Middle East started in 1975 and then really picked up and became expansive to include chemical and biological weapons in 1990. And we're in 2020. Very little happened between that time, but they kept chipping at it. And then when we came up with this draft treaty, we didn't put our names on it. We didn't put who wrote it. We didn't say any of that. We just put it on all the tables of the governments, and we lobbied them at the UN all the time until one of these governments said, can I take that and can I have it in Word so I can copy paste it? I'm not sure. We gave it to them. They copy pasted it. They slapped their own logo of their government in it. And then they sold it to the UN. And then the UN passed a resolution just 2 years ago to have this conference where all these Arabs, Iranians, and Israelis with the P5 can come and sit down and talk about a draft treaty text. Wow, we were 2019, unbeknown to a lot of people, because Daniel says, when it's not blood, it's not in the news. In that building in New York, 22 Arab countries, 4 of the P5, plus Iran, international organizations, and a handful of civil society we pushed ourselves in. We're in the building under one roof, led by women from the Middle East. And the Middle Eastern countries were center, and the P5 were put their seats at the back. It was reorientation, talking about North and South. We put, like, this is our region. We want to figure it out. We got solutions. Stop telling us what to do. I assure you, Middle East has a long history of being able to handle itself. Stop imposing. Just listen, cooperate, assist us, support us, but let the solutions be from the region. Because isn't it much more obvious? The Middle Easterners know their own, excuse my French, their own situation better than others. So I'm saying all of that because it actually happened, November 2019. And the seat for Israel is empty. The seat for America is empty. But the mandate is simple. Reach a consensus freely arrived at of a treaty that creates a WMD free zone in the Middle East. It's a process. Take your time, but be in the process. And you know what we figured out? This is all between us. Don't mention this to the governments. I hope there's no government listening to this. But the fact that these Arabs were under the same roof, plus the Iranians and plus the others, what do you think they talked about in coffee breaks and alongside other technical goodies and experts? About actually what is going on in the region, that we have so many conflicts, and one of them is our resources and water. It comes to the environment. It comes to what we're doing to our own people. And so the conversations start and they bloom and they expand and they broaden. And again, through that human connection, they realize, wait a minute, we're not that different. So the UN is useful, as Daniel said. Our final thought of all of this is that, again, we talked about making sure that we start with ourselves. But I want you to know that there are solutions out there. And yes, usually we wait for the catastrophe to happen at some magnitude of reaching a 1945. So that we can talk about a creation, a regeneration, a resurrection from the ashes. of a phoenix that can create something more, wholesome. And maybe there is time for that to happen. Maybe it has already been happening, just at different levels. We just have to identify them and see them because they're happening. Magic is happening every day, all around us. Figure those ones, nourish it. And by that, I'll plug in, go check out our website and check out what we're doing, because that's important, because all of you can actually see what's happening, that something is succeeding. It's wmd-free.me, wmd-free.me. Because if you can give us your support, I don't care how, figure it out. But the point is that if we find these alliances, to find each other when we come to these forums and not let it just evaporate, that if you nourish those who are seeking peace and love, and to bring that radiation to the places of power so that we can go in there and change it up, then give your energy to that, give your focus to that, give your resources to that, and identify it within your own communities at every level you can find. Because it is no longer, this inaction of us is no longer valid. I don't want to hear that anymore. We got to get up and do shit. And this is the time to do it. And don't wait anymore. Don't wait until everything changes. Get in there and change it. And I'm here to help you. And you're here to help me. So let's talk. You got my details. Ask Steve. He knows everything about me.
Thanks, Dan. You put that in the chat box. Marco, and then we'll go to the chat.
Yeah. I just wanted to pick up different points that Jimena, Dan, and Emad said. Emad was speaking about, at the beginning of the choice, and also he used another word which I loved. It is about radiating, and it says radiating from ourselves onward, or wherever you are. If you are in Colombia or anywhere else, just radiates from there. And I think that aspect of radiation, which sounds a bit esoteric, in fact is not. Also the sun radiates and it's not esoteric. We see it there and we benefit from it. So, but there is something more into understanding and into using this radiation that Emad was referring to, which is very powerful. Is the force of change, in fact, which also is connected. Radiation does happen and does take place from a center. And one thing that I'm really impressed over the past decades is the flourishing of centers of all different sort of things in many countries. And those centers are becoming, radiating points for ideas, movements, choices. And it feels like that the whole governance of the very same concept of nation state is actually coming to an important question mark. Now, I heard some politician wants to say that the nation state is here to stay. And I was wondering, how can you really say that? Because if you go back a few hundred years ago, there was no such thing as a nation state. So it's very likely that at some point, the nation state will no longer there. Hence, the importance of start imagining, nation state is great, it's helped us. If we have created the nation state, it means because it was part of human evolution. And a way of collectively managing our collective power in broad sense. But given what's happening around us, is not completely out of space the question whether the nation state is actually, start changing shape. And, the inclusivity of the movement of civil society that are no longer within countries or global as well, clearly implies a reconfiguration of this concept of global governance beyond the very same concept of nation states. Hence, the need to reconsider national interest, national sovereignty, and on some of the issues that I mentioned there. So then the connection between radiation center and will, for me, are very important, because then is where you as an individual or as a group, you can actually energize types of actions. So this connect, and there is something which is very interesting. Is all these centers, they have something in common, which is this power of radiation that Emad said is the capacity of willing a future and imagining a future and acting on it, and is actually occupying the space almost like the stars occupy the sky. So there is a constellation of these different centers that are chartering somehow a slightly different future from the one that have been working until now. And also another incredible thing has happened in the past few decades, especially in the past 25 years, is that for the first time we have a plan for humanity. It never happened before. If you think about it, if could even in, I don't know, in 20 years ago, it was almost inconceivable, the concept of SDGs. And now instead they exist. They have indicators, countries and other people are putting resources to measure progress. So it's like somehow the collective intelligence of humanity goes far beyond the intelligence of us as single human beings, but we don't necessarily give it sufficient trust, I would say. So appreciating the incredible dimension of this concept, that's for the first time we have a center of will embodied through the United Nations, but not limited to the United Nations, because we said we have centers all around the planet. And then this global plan for humanity is not for the South or for the North, it's for everybody to account on progress to their own citizens. I think that this is incredibly strong. And also this dimension of the collective psyche that Dan was referring to, I think is important to bring it to the fore more and more. We know the psychology is somehow important, but we don't want to speak about it. You know, when you are in a boardroom or when you are in a meeting with other fellow professionals, everybody needs to look cool and strong and determined. We tend to forget the human. The negotiators actually, they keep that in mind quite a bit. But it's not part of the common discourse, this more inner dimension. And I've always been fascinated by how the Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld used to speak to these dimensions all the time. He was addressing the Security Council, he was addressing the General Assembly, always bringing this dimension to the fore. In fact, he wanted the UN meditation room precisely to make people more and more accustomed to that center that is within, in order then to be able to materialize the center that is out there, which is not a physical center in First Avenue in New York, the United Nations, but is rather that center of gravity of humanity as a collective entity, which we should not forget is just part of a larger. We still need to figure out what's the role of humanity versus the other kingdoms, rather than considering them as resources only. I mean, are we resources to the rest of the planet in addition to other human beings? And this, for me, they do remain open questions that this current crisis is actually talking us to. We're becoming excessive consumers of change. We want new things all the time, including ideas. That's why I like to go back sometimes to, I don't know, to the Universal Declaration or some of the articles of the UN Charter, because they are very powerful. It's just kind of almost meditating on them. Like, what do they tell me? What does it mean to act towards one another in spirit of sibling mode? Or to be a center of harmonizing actions? How do I materialize it in my daily action? When I open my email, when I go into a meeting, very small things.
Wow. In a sense, it often seems to me that all of us suffer from a degree of depression, which just reflects the sort of absence of joy in this present state of humanity. But it's such a false view, because the reality is that if you move from that image of from the founding of the UN to what Jimena calls the 1944 moment, to me, it's that we don't see this incredible radiation of human creativity and human intelligence around the idea of interdependence. It is of phenomenal significance. And the more we hide our awareness of that when we go into wherever our profession is actually, because these issues are being fought out. To me, the professions are the place of interest. All professions, any professions, because that's where the will of human creativity meets sort of work. It meets what's produced. And the reality is that interdependence is transforming every profession. So if we see that, we need to change our ability to find the language where we can follow Hammarskjöld's model and be able to go to any environment and speak to the humanity, speak to this new reality, because most people in whom that is alive hide it from their professional face. And yet, if they unmask it in any way whatsoever and make a fool, it doesn't matter. If we unmask it, we see that this is who humanity is becoming. And then we can move from this depression state to just completely demolish it. And I love the thought, Marco, this final thought you have about the will settling into away from these idealistic things of what we could be to the realities of people's lives being changed by choices at every level. And it is true there's a North and a South issue, but from my experience, it's as realistic to a very poor community in Lagos as it is to my community where I live, a rural community in upstate New York, as it is to Texas. So something is happening to the human. And all of us simply have to find the language that gets off our high horse that thinks that we know everything, to stand with our fellow humans and see this radiation, see it in its living human presence, and then see it in wherever our professions are. So I'm so sorry we're not bringing in the panel. My sense is that actually in spirit we are, because we're not bringing in the chat box. Is there anyone who would like to take something from the chat that they would like to respond to? I want to affirm that this is a conversation not just for those of us whose faces you can see, but this is a conversation that we're all, because we're holding in the light this idea of the spiritual dynamics of crisis actually at play at this time in history. It's an incredibly significant time. And it's the process that you and I and all of us, our kids, our grandparents, all of us are going through. That's what life is about now. You know, I love this thing of World Goodwill. One of the key ideas is this idea of, it's the new group of world service. It sounds like jargon. All it is that there now exists today in consciousness a vast group from every single culture, every faith, every tradition, for whom the meaning of their life is becoming significant and serious, and who are finding ways in their life to serve evolution. And this has never happened in human history before. This is the story. Our brothers and sisters, you know, our family, and the group that we identify with a flag is this flag of all who love humanity, and in simple, humble ways and the most serious sort of thought through, clearly spiritual ways, are turning in service. That's the story of our time. And, you know, that's, if only we could move out of this depression of who we are and see that the causes of problems, that human beings are actually engaged for the first time ever with the causes of their problems in relationship. That's something terrific.
I agree. And Steve, there's a saying in the Agni Yoga books that joy is a special wisdom. So in all times, we all have to draw from that wisdom and to work and serve with that wisdom in our hearts that creates that joy. So, you know, that we teach these trainings as part of the UN negotiations that any diplomat and actually any person can speak of their needs or their country's needs, but also can speak for a better world. And that's what Taj Hama School taught us, that anyone can speak for a better world. And so I think that this crisis can lead to that, like, greater consciousness in all corners of the world of being part of acknowledging that we're a family, and family not only to our, like, brothers and humans from this kingdom, as Marco mentioned, but really rebalance the relationship between humanity and also others, so that all beings can thrive and live in this planet. So that's certainly what we should imagine as the future, as Emad said as well, of being having the capacity to imagine that. I think that's the intention that we live in. And if we answering the question that in the chat about which challenge would I choose, I would certainly, among them would be the gender. If we were able to achieve that gender equality, that gender empowerment, that relationship between us, between men and women, I think that would be a really great start in rebalancing the relationship we have with other beings and with our home, with our planet. And I'm sorry I have to leave a little bit sooner, but my toddler, I have family duties that I have to go, but it was lovely to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimena. Thank you.
Steve, can I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
I was going to say, yeah, another thing, I wish I could have other people just, coming in and talking, and we could hear from other people, because I'm trying to read the text, and there's so much rich information in there. There's a lot of comments, there's a lot of reactions, and I would love to then properly actually go through it and see. There's a lot of gems in there, just FYI. But I was listening to all of us, and it reminds me whenever we try to say we're trying to sell impossible ideas as possible. And what is fascinating is that the COVID pandemic, I have a very good friend who's like, I had to write, he's a journalist, and he had to write the titre, or the title, for the day. And they had given him this polling that 4 billion people at that day, at that moment, were in confinement of some sorts. 4 billion people across the world are like confined. And this has never happened in human history, that we're all somehow understand how the other feels. The North and South, as you said, is dissolved for just this brief moment where we're all facing this, as Daniel said, not the most important virus and crisis, but one that has brought some sense of empathy in terms of understanding the other, and to understand the other as being you. If you can see within the reflection that this is 99.9% same as me, the same genes, the same atoms, the same composition, it's very difficult to then focus on that 0.0154% that makes us separated by a little fluke in the system of what, hair color you get, or whatever the case may be. While important to then resurrect and discuss frankly in terms of all of these challenges that Daniel was mentioning early on, at the same time, imagining, wow, there's so much that is actually common ground. Like there's actually way more that brings us together. And this brief moment of confinement has also given humanity a moment of pause. And as we know, this moment of pause, of introspection, reflection, assessment, prioritization, what is actually going on in the world, what is going on in my life, do I really need to be in a 2-hour work commute every day, why couldn't I just do this earlier, or like questioning a lot of what has been known as reality, as being facts in stone, and seeing how it can fizzle. They say habits change in 22 days. It's interesting that a lot of these confinements are putting us in these spaces for more than that. So if habits can change so quickly, habits at what level? Can we have that introspection then translate into this awareness that can be of a different degree, of a different level, where it can connect us again to the divine source of like what we collectively want for our human race and for our planet. And it is, in addition to philosophy and religion and so forth, is history. Humanity has gone through all of these challenges at some point. It's just that it wasn't at this scale, maybe. It wasn't moving as this fast. Maybe there wasn't actually that much clarity or distortion, depending on how you want to look at it. But when we look at, again, these religions, no matter what it is, from the Baha'i faith to Hinduism to all the faiths, at the core of it, it's simplicity. It's actually simple. It's just like, listen, 5 rules, yalla. 5 rules, don't do this, don't do that, do this, khalas, go. And the other one says, you know, if we actually really boil it down, you don't even need 10 commandments, you know, 2 or 3. And so all of these are actually, how can we simplify, clarify, and make sure that we're specific in what we can do in our actions? And then when we realize that these divine laws or divine ways of life are there for very simple reasons, so that we can coexist within our environment, that we can thrive within our environment, and we can be able to then, within this ecosystem, make sure that we survive. I mean, it's quite simple. So let's make the intention collectively now for a moment to not make things so complicated that we will see it as a mountain that we cannot climb. Let us simplify our imagination of the future based on things that we can all agree on. That yes, we want peace. We want security, if it's human security, ecological security, national security, whatever that means. Let us boil it down to these simplicities of like how we can really just live, and know that if we can do it within those values are enshrined within every religion, every pathway to the divine, which is the infinite in terms of how you can get there, then let us know that that infinite paths will provide us the means to then know what to do, to trust within that compass. And if you are a carpenter, if you're a magician, if you're a philosopher, if you're a teacher, in every of your professions that makes you sustain yourself, always, as others have mentioned, bring in and invoke within you moments that you can then have clarity, that you can then transcend to others and through yourself, as a reminder that yes, it's actually quite simple to change mindsets. We focused in the most difficult region, and I assure you, we tell our European friends when they laugh at us that when World War I happened and II, you butchered each other, not once, but twice. I mean, you've got to be really special to kill each other a lot and then go back and do it again. So 80 million people died, and then you're preaching us that we can't have peace. I'm like, listen, Baba, you guys butchered each other, and then you realize this is not the way to do it. So you said, okay, guys, if you're X, Y, and Z, come and join us. Let's build up this coalition. And if the EU in 1945 was it cannot be imagined, it became a reality. The idea grew in 1948, 1950s. But what the EU has done for the Europeans has given them one thing, peace among themselves. That I can have conflict, but I do not have to resolve it through violence. Now, what they've done to the rest of the world is a different question. They can export their violence, you know, and their carnage. But that's not what I'm trying to focus on. I'm saying that within their own collective consciousness, they realize that there are different ways to do this. So as much as we can imagine the future, we can also use what others have already done to find their security and pinpoint, reconfigure, and then through a very nice customization, speak the language of those that we want to change. And through that, the impossible seems so possible and so close that you can taste it. That's the cool part. So yeah, I'm excited. I know there's a lot of depression out there, but damn it, and I work in the Middle East. Come on, guys. We can do it. I mean, if I'm so excited about the Middle East, then there's something wrong with me possibly, but there's also that there is, once you're unveiled, and it's always a glimpse, you know, Iranians, we have lots of poets. And we say, you know, to understand divine, you know, all of our poets are drunk, but they're actually drunk because you have to be drunk to be in love with your God, to reach your God. But they say that when you get too close to God, the moth burns, it's too close to the fire. And that balance of being able to tap into that flame of knowledge and wisdom, but not to then assume that you can take all of it, that you have to be close enough to tailor it, to achieve enough warmth from it, but don't burn in the process. And for that allows us to have one foot on the ground and have one that guides us through another paradigm. So in that, I hope that we can find our way, our own personal way, that we can find that balance between the moth and the flame, and hope that through that, we can see the light, and the light then provides us so much love. Ooh la la, it's fantastic. And that can nourish us and fuel us to continue on the path towards what we believe to be true. I'll stop there now.
Thank you, Emad. Wow.
Maybe Steve may have one last comment from my side.
Look, I'll tell you what, but and quite quickly now, because we want to wrap up. Dan, and then we'll go to Marco. Dan, do you have anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I do. And actually it goes back to one of the, so firstly, I don't like to speak after Emad. In the future, let's just make that very clear. I'm not ever going to join a panel where I have to follow him. But yeah, I want to respond to something that I saw in the chat box, which was about how many people know their neighbor and what are we teaching our children?
Yeah.
And it got me thinking about who is on this panel. And one of the tendencies that we have, which is to sort of highlight I mean, myself excluded, obviously, but to highlight the exceptional. So Emad is creating a Middle East peace treaty to end nuclear weapons. That's ridiculous. And you have Jimena, who was one of the lead negotiators for the global agenda on development. That's also ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so you have like these people who do amazing things, and then they come and they say, you can do it too. But the reality is that it's very difficult to put yourself in that position. And so what I think is the more, at least for me, like what helps me sleep at night is to say, what are the opportunities before me that I can take advantage of? I'm not going to solve the Middle East crisis. Emad can do that. Obviously he can do that. And I, as a American over here.
Thanks,
like,
Daniel. Thanks. You know.
You take care of that.
I'll cover that. You take the other one. You take the other issue.
I'll take the U.S. politics. Anyway, but that said, what are the opportunities we have? What can we do with our neighbors? And the analogy that I think about is recycling. My recycling a can or recycling a piece of cardboard is not ultimately going to make a difference. But I do it because there's billions of other people who are doing it. And if each of us decides to do it, then it will create this movement. So we're not all going to create the amazing recycling center that will have this new form of energy that, we're not all going to do that. The Emads and the Jimenas of the world, they will do that, hopefully. But what we can all do is we can all, I'm sorry to embarrass you, Emad. I know it's very un-Persian of me. So what we can all do.
I do want to retire at some point. I mean, don't be worried.
So, but what we can all do is find our little can to recycle. And then as we do that, as we do our little bit, like that is what this collective transformation is that Steve referred to. So do you know your neighbors? What do you teach your children? And then the other thing that I was thinking about is that change is generational and rarely legislative. So what I mean by that is in the US, we had this wonderful legislation that came down after after the end of the Civil War, and then it was sort of reaffirmed with Brown versus Board of Education, ending the practice of segregation. But that doesn't change the heart. That just changes some text on paper and a little bit how people now either change their policies, but that's unlikely. They mostly modify them to continue to perpetuate these differences. And what we need to do is find ways to change heart. And that is actually quite challenging and quite slow and quite generational. And so when Jimena was saying gender equality, and then in the chat box, somebody wrote about race issues, I think that these issues of identity, and Emad was talking about this as well, where we're 99.99% the same. These issues of identity are so foundational. And in fact, unfortunately, they're exacerbated and highlighted in our schools, where we're taught to find the difference. All we do is look for differences, and we respond to things with "but me." You say this, good idea, but I think that. Well, why not and? This is a very well-known indigenous construct of how to engage in dialogue. You do and, not but, because but puts the other person down and isn't building off of what happened before. But our schools are teaching us that we have this other approach to education that I think is quite challenging. And unless we change this, it's going to be difficult. The last thing is what I mean by, that was legislative. What I mean by generational, I was watching basketball with a friend who was really into it, and he knows a lot of the history and all this stuff. And he said, now is the time that we're seeing the effects of the three-point line. I said, what do you mean? It's been around for 30 years. He said, Dan, change is generational. The first people with the three-point line didn't know how to do it. The next people learn from the mistakes of the first. So it's only when that second round is now teaching the third and fourth round of generations with the three-point line that we actually see what it looks like. This is the same with gender inequality, with habits of consumption and production. We don't know, but let us try to fake it until we can make it so that the next generation will know better, and the next generation will know better. It's not going to be us who can do it, because it's all generational. And that's, in some ways, it alleviates the pressure from all of us to do things right now or else we're failing. And it also encourages us to think and invest in the future, our own future, our own progeny, and that of our neighbors. And if we do that, I think that we can be in the right mental space to not feel defeated when we're not changing the world every single day, but we're changing maybe our community, maybe we're changing one habit that we have. And that collectively is what will make a difference. And I think this crisis and these collective crises are showing us that that's the way. So thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dan. Marco.
Maybe just two points. One is from what Emad said when he was speaking about the Europe and European countries. I actually believe that it's quite important that Europe and European countries recognize the devastating impact of colonialism. I think that if a region that speaks to human rights and portray human rights, I think we have an obligation to do that. And I think that the time has come, or is coming, and at least an expression of apology needs to be formulated somehow. Mm-hmm. And I hope that comes forward soon.
We need more than an apology. Come on, Marco. We need a little bit. Don't worry, the Italians didn't do much, but the others we have to talk about.
It's also an issue of collective responsibility. So everybody did their bit, but collectively is even worse. I think that is probably not going to redress what has happened, and the effects of it is under our eyes in many countries. So I think that point of I wouldn't say, I wouldn't know how to term it differently, but is part of the necessary, mending and getting ready on a different path of relations on a planetary scale. So as Emad said, yes, Middle East is important. There are also other parts of the world that have some cleanup to do, and Europe is one of them. It's important to express that and to recognize what has happened and what is still happening because of that. The other thing is about will. I think that has come through in many different aspects in our conversation, and I really love it. I think it's very important to try to learn more and more how we decide collectively. Because the decision-making process is actually a process through which we mature, as we have heard today. And this is a moment of crisis also due to the type of decision-making that we have. There are interesting experiments across the globe about taking decision by consensus, or even better, by unanimity. And that, for me, has to do also with the change of nation states that is coming forward, because the more we shift toward different type of decision-making, given the very same model of democracy that we have at the moment, which was exchanging with Daniel some time ago, is still fundamentally based on the fact that you've got the majority that beats the minority. And there is an inherent form of violence into it also. This is something that, it's in itself an important process. It has helped a lot and it's taken us where we are now. But it doesn't mean that although we can do better in democracy, we can also start exploring more consciously other forms of decision-making that builds more on the other qualities that we've been discussing today. Because there are certain forms of violence which are built in the decision-making in and of itself. And that doesn't help because there are little seeds that remains and then germinates at some point. So I don't think that, probably many of the people that are online are familiar with the writings of Roberto Saggioli. I'm familiar with it. This is where I got my inspiration on the will. There are many, many others. But I think is an important moment now to understand better and better how myself as an individual, I actually apply my will and what type of qualities I accompany the expression of will through the decisions that I take collectively or also individually. So thank you very much. It was really fantastic to be with you today, and Dan, Emad, Jimena, you, Steve, and the other friends online. Really a pleasure.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Emad. And thank you, Jimena. Look, this has been a wonderful session. And I really do feel that all of the participants around the world who've participated through the chat box, as I think you said, Dan, there's terrific wisdom in there. Michael, when you come on, if you can perhaps just remind people how they can save that chat box, because there's so much there. We do need to move on with time. We're going to close a little bit late. The meditation is really important sort of part of the work based on the idea of radiation. So right now, I just want to thank the four of you. Jimena is here in spirit, and bless you for being with your family. Thank you, the three of you who are here, for presenting the voice of those whose profession is occupied with international relations, to make us, all of us, see that the future is incredibly hopeful, because we've heard from the voices of professionals who are not on their own, who are not simply individuals. They reflect a body of thought from within their profession. So, friends, thank you very much indeed.